Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin shortly. If you're having problems with audio, please try refreshing or using a different browser. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section. We will try to answer your questions in the order that we receive them. Good day. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Monday event called HRCI Insights. These are the episodes that provide insights on current HR products, services, and technologies. Today's topic is an interesting one. We'll be covering accelerating skill talent like a pro. My name is Nella Brown, and I will be your host and facilitator today. For those that don't know me, I am the Senior Account Manager at HRCI. Throughout my career, I've been involved with all aspects of account management, customer experience, and organizational administration. Currently, I manage companies and organizations within the US that help prepare HR professionals becoming HRCI certified. I am very pleased to introduce today's speaker. Taylor Blake is the co-founder and chief product officer of Learn In, a platform that helps companies establish talent academies to unify all the resources needed for building a highly skilled workforce. Prior to Learn In, Taylor was a founding team member of Degree. At Degree, Taylor focused on building products to measure skills, close skill gaps, and match people to opportunities. Before Degree, Taylor worked at RBL Group, the HR consulting firm founded by Dave Ulrich. Taylor is passionate about finding ways to make upskilling more successful, inclusive, and accessible. Bethany Vogel designs and develops transformative collaborative learning journeys that integrate technology, ecosystems, and enable human connections. She has over 10 years of experience working with clients across a range of industries, including financial services, pharmaceuticals, sales, and manufacturing. Bethany's work often focuses on creating cohort-based learning experiences that harness social, space, and micro-learning strategies. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Taylor and Bethany, as they will get to discuss handling the development of skilled talent in today's high-pressure environment of the talent wars. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Nella, and hello, everyone. So good to be with you. So let me pull up my screen. Let's jump into it. So we are going to be relying on mostly Bethany's incredible expertise. We're going to walk you through how to accelerate skilled talent. Now, we're not going to focus on so much why this is important right now. We hope if you're here, you know why this is important, why it's more critical than ever. But we're really going to focus on more of the how-to. So some of the actual strategies, some of the things that we've seen from my experience, from Bethany's experience, in terms of how companies can get this wrong, how to think about it, how to accelerate it. So that's where we're going to spend our time today. Now, let me start with this. There's no way to, in order to accelerate, you need to know where you're going. And I see a lot of companies get this wrong from the get-go, right? It's, you know, their efforts are kind of doomed from the start because they don't have good alignment in terms of the outcomes that they're looking for. I really like this model. This was introduced to me by a friend, Beth Davies. She was the director of L&D at Tesla. And she said, you know, we get so many requests for training, for learning, and it can all sort of sound similar, but she uses these three circles to really differentiate. You know, there's actually different types of needs, there's different types of outcomes, there's different types of interventions that are going to be successful based on what we're trying to do. She broke it up based on training. So this is the tasks and processes for people to do their jobs, to understand the systems they're using. It's focused on productivity. There's the development side, which is developing people into, you know, better managers, better leaders, or helping them develop new skill sets, preparing them for new roles. And there's learning, which is more of the curiosity-based, you know, do I feel like I have chances to learn new things? Do I feel like my company is investing in me? And this, the first time I saw it, it was a light bulb moment for me, because so often we see that there's mismanaged expectations. I'm going to call out one, and I want Bethany for you to chime in if you've seen this be helpful or seen kind of mismanaged expectations here. I'll talk to so many companies who say, hey, we have employees who are in a call center. So, you know, we're managing their productivity really tightly. And there's this tension between we want to invest in these employees, maybe prepare them for new or different roles inside the company. But as soon as you start pulling them away from the computer or from the phone, hey, it's hurting productivity. So what are you doing? Because we thought, your job is to develop these employees and help them be more productive. Well, actually, we're trying to, we have to have them spend some time away from their computer, from the phone, to develop them into, new and different roles inside the company. That's this tension between training for, the role that they're in right now and development into new and better roles. And we see that, the difference in expectations so often. Bethany, anyone's come to mind as you look at this, what do you think?
Yeah, building off of some of that tension, I also know that in healthcare, that can be a really big challenge. You have nurses and you want to bring them through simulations. I've seen amazing simulation centers, but you've got to take them off the floor to be able to do that. And managing the time to be able to approach any one of these can be quite a challenge.
Yeah, certainly, which is why it's so important to get alignment. Both, hey, what do my employees need? What does the business need? If you can get aligned around that, it's going to make everything so much easier. Let me call out one additional one I see all the time. I talk to companies all the time who have purchased some licenses for learning content. Maybe it's LinkedIn Learning. They've said, great, our employees said they didn't feel like we were investing in them. So we went out and we bought a bunch of LinkedIn Learning licenses. We've made those available so that employees, if they're curious about a topic, if they want to own their own development, if they want to pursue self-directed learning, now they have an avenue for that. I think that's a really good solution for this learning circle in the bottom right. But I also see companies then a year later say, hey, how come all of this online content that we've purchased, how come it's not helping us, fill these hard to fill roles? How come people aren't using these resources to become data scientists and, develop these new skill sets that we need internally? As well, maybe we're starting to mix up these kind of circles again. So I think that's another case. So here's a question to consider, which is inside of your organization today, which areas get the most time right now? Is it the training? Is it development? Is it learning? And then on the flip side, which areas do you feel like need extra investment? One thing that jumps out at me, well, Bethany, let me frame this to you. Where do you see companies, a lot of the companies you work with, which of these areas do you feel like get neglected more often than not?
I think a lot of companies are really good at focusing on training. And I'm going to talk about an example actually where training was forgotten and why it was important. But a lot of companies really do struggle about that development piece and that learning piece. And the reason why is the training element often connects to either requirements, we have to do this, or it's specific with a business objective. But when we look at development and learning, a lot of those are actually really important when you consider our learners' needs and what they're going through, what they're experiencing. And historically, we haven't brought that consideration into our design and our efforts. So I see development and learning often lacking.
Same. I mean, the number of companies who say, hey, all of our exit interviews, employees are saying that they don't feel like they're being invested in, that they don't have chances for learning. I mean, most of those companies probably have an LMS and some required, training or compliance, right? They've got the training covered. So often it's the other two that go neglected, but not all the time, right? And Bethany, I know you want to share this story, which is thinking through these individual pieces can help you really align to the needs of the business, needs of the employees. Walk us through this example.
Yeah, so this was a really interesting example. It was applying a new performance management system, right? Instead of just once a year checking in and saying, hey, thumbs up, thumbs down, it's having these like quarterly conversations. And the goal, of course, is to be able to get those higher quality outputs, because several times throughout the year, you're getting improved feedback. Your manager is acting as that coach in that role. So there were a couple of different elements going on. As you can see, it's a big initiative. And sometimes we can see misalignment with the business objectives. This was actually a great example where the initiative was connected with the business objective very clearly, right? We knew what we were trying to achieve. So here in, the training, they needed to learn the actual process and the new system, right? New technologies to work with. Instead of having one conversation, you're having 4 conversations. How are you going to set those up? How are you going to schedule them? What are the forms that you have to fill out, etc. Then when it comes to the learning piece of it, right, we're giving them opportunities to go out and find different trust models and maybe some different forms that you can use to give feedback, different ways that you might want to set goals. And then when it comes to the development piece, it's around, actually having those coaching conversations, actually becoming a better manager, being able to coach even into your next role or what that might look like. The problem with that, though, was they didn't consider the training portion. They just focused in on the development and the learning, giving them the different tools and content of, okay, here's how you go build trust. And then we created some different opportunities of how to be able to have those coaching conversations. And the thought was, well, the training on the new performance management process and system will come, which is fair. Like if you think about something like this, relatively speaking, you can have learning and development opportunities to build trust or have that coaching conversation. You don't necessarily need the training piece to it. But the problem was they didn't consider their learners' needs. So this particular performance management process was based on paying for performance. So 25% of their salary was at stake. And not being trained on the new processes meant they were scared about what was going to happen because they didn't know the requirements and the steps that they had to take to ensure that they got 25% of their salary. That's a really big deal. So if you jump to the next slide, this is the really important piece. Yes, you need to be aligned with your business objectives, but you really need to account for your learners' needs within each of those 3 circles as well. And as you can see here, and if we're looking at the hierarchy of needs, which is very focused on psychology, but their basic needs, the safety needs, the physiological needs were at risk, which meant they could not learn about building trust. They couldn't focus on their accomplishments, and they couldn't move into, okay, what do I want my next role to be? Because they were too worried about, am I going to have the same standard of living? Is my budget going to have to change? Can I meet rent next week? Whereas if we would have just given them that opportunity to understand the process of how things were going to work, they would be able to move into those additional needs. And this is something, you don't need to get real specific, or you don't have to always look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? But you do need to consider what your learners are going through and how they also fit into your business objectives.
Yep, love it. So this first section was really, how do we get the alignment up front so that between learners, between the business, we kind of know the outcomes that we're looking for. So Bethany, summarize kind of your takeaways from this section. What can we do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So look at your learners' needs, conduct those focus groups, do empathy exercises. But the other thing is you can actually do those empathy exercises with your stakeholders. And when you have those opportunities, you'll be able to figure out a lot of assumptions that maybe weren't voiced. And so you'll consider the business needs as well as the learner needs from individual stakeholder perspectives, and you'll gain alignment there.
Love it. So this next section, I really want to talk about, great. We have some alignment in terms of maybe we need to develop better managers. Maybe our business is changing and we need to upskill people in terms of new skills, new technology. Those are things I hear a lot. How do we actually create an experience like this? How do we create, and the word I'm going to use is journey a lot. How do we create this journey? Because if we just need someone to know how to do a very specific task, it might be as simple as giving them a job aid or a checklist or some sort of quick tutorial. But if we're trying to develop people into better managers, better leaders, give them new skill sets, prepare them for, hard to fill roles inside the organization, it is a journey, it is a process. And, it's going to require, different types of facilitation in terms of how do you take people through that journey. So Bethany, frame this question out, and, I'm excited to, further explain kind of why we're asking about emotions as part of the learner journey.
Yes. So would love to see what you felt here. I definitely see afraid and confused, anger. I also saw somebody say they were motivated, irritated, actually, curiosity, frustration. I am seeing a few more negative emotions than positive emotions. So hold on to this thought, because I'm going to talk about how emotions play a really, really big role when you're creating that journey. And just like you talked about, content has a place, but it doesn't mean that just because you put content out there, you're actually going to learn. In fact, you need emotions to be able to learn. So let's talk about, what are some of those key pieces in a journey? And you can maybe share some thoughts that you have there, Taylor.
Yeah. So when I started in this space, very naive, and I've heard someone else say this, and I thought it resonated a lot. They said, we used to think about workplace learning and training as an information problem. How do we get the right information to the right person? And then it's just you're just pushing out information, and how do you get it out to the right person at the right time? And I think actually it's much more than just an information problem. It's a motivation, it's a meaning, and, an emotional, if we want people to understand and apply and change their behavior, it takes much more than just information to do that. So I've seen a lot of companies say, we want you to do something different, so here's a bunch of information. Well, how do we actually create that a richer, more meaningful experience around that? It requires a lot of these elements. So I'm always advocating for things like reflection, practice, discussion, reinforcement, maybe mentoring, kind of all of these pieces. How do we bring that in? And Bethany, I know you've got a great model that helps frame out some of this. So explain this one to us.
So the AGES model. This is probably something that many of you have heard of. Maybe you haven't, though. And I love the AGES model. And it really describes 4 important pieces that you need to incorporate in a learning journey, right? We've got to get people's attention. We know that generating insights, like that takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. You read something and then you learn it and you know it, there's a process that you're going through, and it takes time. That's why spaced learning is important. And then, here we start to connect to that emotions piece. I had a dear mentor of mine who showed this to me for the first time, and it completely changed my approach towards how I went with learning, and looked at learning. Because just like you talked about, Taylor, I probably went in a little naive, and it was very black and white, right? It was, here's the content, here's the information, go forth and do good things. But I didn't recognize that the emotions that we go through play such a key piece. And so, jumping back actually to the example that we had just talked about, every one of you started to tap into an emotion when we talked about feedback. That is an emotion that if you are teaching your learners how to give feedback, you can ask them just that question. What was the emotion that you experienced? And depending on the circumstance and the context in which you're giving feedback, you can tap into those emotions and say, okay, if you had a negative experience, you were frustrated, let's make sure we teach you how to give feedback so that you are not creating a frustrating experience for somebody else. Or vice versa, you had a really great experience. Let's make sure that we look into what made that experience really good, and how can you bring that forward in the learning journey. Yes, you've got that model, but what are the nuances between it? How can we tap into your previous experiences? And it's that emotion that's going to get their attention, right? And so you can start to see different ways where you can combine these different elements, getting attention and emotions, right? Another opportunity, just like we've talked about, we're creating this journey. Content is not enough. We need to have that context as well. So we're going out and, we're doing a presentation, or we're having a conversation in work. We're coming back, we're having some discussion, we're reflecting on it, right? A little bit later. That's going to take some time, especially when you get to do it either with a coach or a cohort. That's something that I really like to see come about. And, again, that's where the spaced learning comes in. It happens over time. So this is a great way that I love to think about that learner's journey, and how are we capturing the best way so that they can take that content and turn it into performance, right?
Yep, love it. But, you mentioned nuance. There is some nuance here and I'm guilty of this, because I love to advocate for, don't just take this content and, give it to people, but let's add the reflection, the practice, the discussion. But there's, there can be right ways and wrong ways, or, ways of doing it more effectively to really drive to manage those emotions well, to really drive to the outcomes and performance that we want. Mm-hmm. So this is mistakes to avoid. Tell me a little bit about, you can't just say, great, if we need practice and reflection and discussion, let's shove it all in there. Walk me through some of this, how you've seen these things managed well, but sometimes not so well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So oftentimes when you are creating a journey like this, and when you are jumping into that deep learning, it takes time, and you have to provide opportunities to fail, right? We start to get in some of these vulnerable spaces. That's where the learning takes place. But just like how we interact with other people, we have to build up our trust, right? And so you also have to build up your learner's trust. And that does not happen immediately. It happens over time. So consider in a discussion, whether it's synchronous, asynchronous, digital, face-to-face, how are you building up their trust with you as the one who's giving this learning journey, right? Um, Same thing here when you're looking at like a poll or a sharing activity. If I were to talk about those negative emotions that maybe came up in feedback and then just said, good luck, don't worry about it. We'll make all things great and wonderful and it'll all be okay. You can set people in the wrong mindset when you don't follow up on that, right? And a lot of other things that I see, and I have to be really careful about this as a learning designer, this is where I appreciate getting feedback from learners themselves is, am I doing an activity that is ruthlessly relevant? Or is this just an activity for activity's sake, right? We can get kind of carried away there when we don't make it relevant.
Yeah, I think those are great examples. Just a little bit of my own reflection going through even this conversation with you. One thing that really stands out to me, this is such a human process, right? We started with understanding the needs of your employees, your learners, and also how to align it to the business. But then how do you take someone through this experience that's going to maximize, their chances for skill development? And it's very human as well. We're talking about emotions. We're talking about the nuances of collaboration and feedback, which kind of gets us into this next section we're going to talk about here in a bit. I might be getting ahead of myself, but this is, how are we actually going to do this? How do we manage this across a global organization? We have so many employees. How do we do this well? But tell me a little bit, what can we do today? And then we're going to jump into how do we actually bring this to life inside of our organizations?
Yeah. Well, you actually just called out the key piece. This is a human experience. Sometimes we forget that our learners are human. Sometimes we forget the other people on our team are human and that our stakeholders are human, right? So if we really step back, we look at our learners as customers, right? We can create these like customer journey maps, taking from different marketing and product development strategies, right? There's a lot of places there where they consider what's the experience that their customers are going through. So focus on the journey and the human aspects of it. Step back and don't be so zeroed in on what the content is. We have a plethora of content. The content will come. It's how you go through that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask this specific poll. So the question is, we've talked about these learning journeys and how it's, we need to create these environments for upskilling, for skill development. But what are the biggest challenges that you faced in terms of developing these initiatives? Lack of time, resources, cost, resistance from employees, resistance from upper management. So take a minute, think about that, because I really want to, let me leave it here for a second. I really want to get into, this is all great in theory. How do we really bring this to life inside of our organizations where there are constraints? Yes, if we had all of the time and all of the resources and all of the buy-in, then we could create these really amazing learning journeys for all of our employees. But, we have these constraints, we have all of these challenges. So while you're thinking about that, Bethany, what do you think as you see, as you talk to companies about, this is what it takes to create a great learning journey, but actually putting it into practice, where do you find, the constraints, the resistance?
So I see one of the comments in there saying there's no all of the above button. And I think that we deal with all of these to one degree or another, right? And some specific projects that we may be focusing on may have a bigger challenge than others. Sometimes you may have a very strong resistance from employees. Maybe sometimes you're going to have a really strong challenge when it comes to the cost of development, right? So there's a lot of different things, but I do find that most organizations, especially right now, they are strapped for time and resources. And I think resources can look a lot of different ways, whether it's financial resources, it's the human resources that we need. But I'm curious, what do you see?
Oh, yeah, it's time, resources. I think increasingly the business is starting to realize that, this skills stuff, this learning stuff, it's not just optional anymore. Both based on sort of, the great resignation and just how much the world is changing and how much businesses need to change to keep up. They realize our people actually are more critical and important than ever. And we need to make them effective. We need to, have the skills and talent we need to succeed as a business. So I'm actually seeing more and more buy-in from the business, but then it hits this, okay, well, great. We've been waiting for buy-in. We've got some buy-in, but now it's the time and the resources. How do we actually bring this to life? So let me pull up. So these are not your poll results, but these are from a survey taken 2 years ago. And we're going to pull up kind of your poll results on top of these, see how they might compare. But the slide is from survey results from 2 years ago. This was asked broadly across the industry. What are the challenges you're facing? So let's see, lack of time to develop. So still, actually in the poll, it looks like 45%. I mean, that's kind of and that's sort of definitely the highest one. Resistance from upper management comes in second in the poll results.
Yeah, that actually fits back to even what you were talking about at the very beginning, the mismanagement of those expectations of, hey, we want to give this person an opportunity to develop, but you're hurting my productivity.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That definitely aligns.
Totally. Great. So we need to figure out how to get past these constraints so that, the business can have the skill and talent that it needs to succeed. Lack of time to develop, that's kind of the biggest constraint that we're seeing here in the poll results. Bethany, how have you seen companies who have done this successfully combat that constraint? We just don't have time to create these amazing learning journeys the way we'd want to.
Yeah, so the companies that I have seen do this really well are really, really, really good at becoming extremely focused on 2 to 3 priorities. Max, you get 3 to 5, but there's no such thing as 10 priorities. It just doesn't exist because you're split too many different ways. And so you have to get really aligned, just like we were talking about at the very beginning. And then you're going to have to start saying no. And I realize how incredibly hard that is to say no. But one of the strategies that I love to use is not necessarily no, it's just not yet. And so, we can use some of those agile methodologies and mindsets to break down our work into smaller chunks, right? And so we're just prioritizing one piece of it, and then we go to the next piece of it. The other piece, the other thing that companies do really well for specific initiatives is they will go out and they will tap into their network. And so they're looking at the network capabilities. They're finding champions and energizers for their project. And these are the people that end up having influence within the organization. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal leader, but if you consider who those people are and bring them into the fold, bring them into the project, those are the people that I see be really successful.
Yeah, I love that. Let me add a couple things I've seen. One is I talk to so many companies who have a leadership program that's perpetually, 6 to 9 months away from launching. And I think some of it is we try to do everything through a single program. So some of it, to your point of being more agile, agile doesn't need to mean, incomplete, but let's think about smaller. How can we take smaller, meaningful chunks, deliver that, let people have a great experience around it, build and iterate and do more. I think that's kind of one way of doing it. One thing that also jumped out at me in these results that came from 2 years ago, finding the right training resources is up here pretty high. In the poll results, much lower. Right? I think this is part of this theme of, actually just having the resources and content. It's much less a problem than it used to be. Increasingly, we can get our hands on content and resources, but it's how do we, craft that experience around it. Here's one other idea I'll highlight, which is, if learning and HR folks have to do all of this themselves, that's a huge lift. But I've seen the power of cohorts be able to provide a lot of the meaningful interaction, reflection, discussion, practice, getting people in a room together where they're interacting with each other. And it's not just all, what is it? A sage on the stage versus guide on the side, right? If all of this has to come through a trainer or an expert, gosh, they're going to be strapped for time. But if we can organize these cohorts inside our companies, provide them the guidance and the structure, but they're really help, teaching and practicing and discussing together, I think it can take a lot of the lift off. Have you seen that what has your experience been in terms of cohort-based learning?
I couldn't agree with you more. We have a lot of the content out there. We're finding better ways to be able to curate it. It's important. But we learn from each other. We learn with and from each other. And so historically, L&D, just what you talked about at the beginning, it was an information problem. And it was about getting that out there. We didn't consider how we were learning from one another. Learning is often a social journey. And so when you actually step back and you think about how to create space for our learners, right? Like that's what we're doing. We're just creating a space for them to play with it, toss it around. And when you really start to engage who those learners are and use their resources, you'll come up with a better experience than you ever thought. In fact, just to connect it back to the example that I had at the very beginning, where I talked about this, they were creating a performance management system. They didn't think about the place to have some of those questions and training about their process. What ended up happening, and this was the coolest thing to see because it wasn't planned, but there was a very specific space, and it was just a simple discussion forum that was saying, hey, what's on your mind? What's top of mind for you? What are you going through? What are you experiencing? And we started to see an outpour of people saying, well, I'm really focused on this right now. I am scared about this. I don't know how to handle this situation. I don't know how to handle this conversation that's coming up. I don't know what to do with this process coming up. And what ended up happening was this cohort came in and they were able to help one another move through that journey and move through that challenge. So something to consider, but it's not always easy to think about how that journey looks because you got to let go of control.
That's a big one. Well, love it. And a lot of, and we'll kind of wrap things up here, but this is a lot of, one of the things that we're trying to do with Learn In, right, is create that space, create the more collaborative learning and give you better tools and technology Because if you're trying to build a learning journey right now in your LMS, that's going to be a hard, frustrating process. So I do think there's also Learn In or otherwise better tools and technology out there that can make this whole thing a little bit easier as well. So Bethany, sum this up for us. What can we do today?
Yeah, I think today we really focused on alignment and the journey that you're focused on. Consider your mindset and how you approach that alignment and the journey, because sometimes we can get in our way more than we think. So just a consideration there.
Okay, love it. All right, well, that's the end of this formal presentation. I know we want to save some time for questions. So Nella, I'll let you drive.
Thank you so much, Taylor and Bethany, for that presentation. We have tons of questions from our participants. If we can switch over to the next slide. Learn In helps companies establish talent academies that can help steer all the resources needed for building a highly skilled workforce. And so if you would like to learn a little bit more about Learn In, please fill out this poll, and we will get that information into the hands of the Learn In reps. So thank you so much once again, Taylor and Bethany. We're really grateful for you participating. And for all the participants on the call, feel free to bring a friend, certified or not, so they can hear some more insights on current HR products, services, and technologies. So Taylor and Bethany, you guys touched on the accelerators to deliver skill building programs. And so we wanted to ask you a couple of questions so we can take turns. So one of the questions that came up is, what is the best way to encourage participation in learning once you've designed and implemented a program? So any ideas that you can offer the people on this call today for raising more engagement?
Yeah, I've got a couple, and I'm curious on Bethany's thoughts. One is where the encouragement is coming from really matters. If learning or HR is encouraging me, that's a lot different than if my manager or my functional leader is encouraging me, right? So the more that we can make this about, hey, business leaders, we want to help solve your problems. We co-create this learning experience, and then the functional leaders and managers encourage you, that makes a huge difference. But, I also think it's important to, be explicit in terms of, this is something we want you to participate in. And this is something that we want you to put on your calendar. I always advocate for that. Put it on your calendar. If it's just on it's always going to fall to the bottom of your to-do list unless you put it on your calendar, at least for me. So that's another big thing we advocate for.
Yeah, I agree. I see that. Along those lines, a marketing and communications plan is pretty critical to an initiative like this. Just because you build it does not mean they will come. But the other piece that I find really encouraging to find that engagement is it goes back to that cohort piece, highlighting contributions from people within the cohort. Or another thing is looking at like a leaderboard, right? So truly making this that social cohort experience when you start to see the social context and, oh, you mean my peers are doing this? My peers are being successful. My peers are contributing and making this a meaningful journey. That'll pull people in quickly.
Thank you for that. One of the results, right, from the poll was finding time. So how do you suggest companies best allocate time for employees to learn?
Yeah, so part of the actual Learn In product and solution is, first you start with alignment with business leaders. What are we trying to accomplish together? Great. Well, what are we going to need to actually drive that? And then part of the Learn In tool is the company being able to say, hey, we're going to give you 2 hours a week to participate in these learning activities, to participate in this program, because we know that it helps the business. And we've decided that that's a good use of time. So like I said, putting it on people's calendars. So for the employees, I think that's really critical. There's also the time of the L&D and HR team who are trying to build these experiences. I think a lot of that is prioritizing ruthlessly, as Bethany said, but I can't get past enough. Just if you expect people to do it on their own time, very few of your employees are going to have the time. And even the ones who are, it's also going to be, not all of your employees have the same amount of discretionary time, and that's going to have an impact across your business. So give people an hour, 2 hours, a week, a month, put it on their calendar, align with the business as to why this helps everyone. I think that goes a really long ways.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about the Learn In platform is that it is right there to be able to block off your time on your calendar. It's an amazing feature. I find that in these programs, there just needs to be one activity right at the beginning where they have to do something simple that establishes their commitment to this journey, to this learning journey. And oftentimes it's something as simple as blocking off time. People who do that are typically 3 to 4 times more likely to complete the journey.
Sorry, I was reading the questions in the Q&A box. So one question that we have is from Michelle, and she said, how do we develop our employees when we don't have promotional positions available for them? We want to offer development, but sometimes employees expect instant rewards, such as promotions or higher pay. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and I mean, we've seen this. If you say that the reason why you go through this upskilling experience is to get this specific job inside the company, and people go through that experience and you're like, hey, well, this job's not open right now. I mean, that's a frustrating experience. You just went through this whole process. So I think some of it is you can recognize that there's reasons for upskilling beyond or promotion and pay, right? But we can also create new opportunities for people to apply their newfound skills outside of an entire job change, right? So you can add stretch assignments or projects or change their current job responsibilities in a way that they're applying it. And honestly, we do advocate for spot bonuses, right? So, hey, if someone's gone through this really great learning and skill building experience, it doesn't have to be a sort of an entire job change, an entire step up in terms of pay. But the companies who say, we recognize that this was a commitment for you, here's a small spot bonus or raise, that can also go a long ways. We need to, right now, upskilling it has these huge steps. And we need to find ways to make little smaller steps in that employee progress, in their progress in their journey.
It's a really good point. Again, I had another mentor who taught me a lot about different motivations, right? And she always described it as fame, glory, and money. And a lot of times we're really focused on this money piece. And a lot of times we're focused on maybe fame, which might be like a promotion, right? And so we have these like fixed ways of how we might see the fame, glory, or money, but there are a lot of different ways that you might be able to achieve that. And oftentimes, like public recognition, again, can go a really long ways for people just being recognized for the work that they do. It's also a great opportunity to have a coaching conversation. Where do you want to go eventually, right? You can be honest. I don't have an opportunity to give you a promotion at this moment in time, but let's talk about where you want to go 6, 12 months down the road, 2 years down the road. How can we start working to get you there now?
Okay. Excellent. Does Learn In offer any guides to having those conversations? or any other resources. So something that came up with was, what are some technologies and principles that can help deliver these effective learning programs?
Yeah, so that's essentially what Learn In does. We are the technology solution that's making these learning journeys or these academies easier to deliver. And we have all sorts of resources in terms of best practices and how to think, how to kind of bring those to life. So reach out to Learn In. We definitely have a lot, and can point you to other resources as well.
Excellent. Bethany, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Taylor's got it.
Okay. All right. So we have a couple more minutes for a couple more questions. So we have one question here that says, what do you offer as advice to the best approach to increase top management buy-in to training and development?
Yeah, I think I saw, I think it was a PwC survey that was surveying CEOs and executive leaders about their concerns for their businesses. And the availability of key skills and key talent is right up there. I mean, it's a sort of top 3 concern across the board. I think there is this latent, underlying concern that executives have. It's just whether or not, I think as HR learning training leaders, we need to be credible and helpful in terms of helping executives kind of navigate, I think we need to really frame it in terms of, we're here to help the business be successful. What does the business need to be successful? Is there a learning, training, development component of that? And I think you just got to, hopefully build up some credibility so that you can be in those conversations, frame it in terms of their problems, their challenges, and be honest in terms of, here's where learning and development and training can move the needle, or maybe can't move the needle. Not pretending like we can do everything, but the things we can do, we can really have an impact on some of our business's biggest challenges and opportunities. So it is a conversation, frame it in terms of their needs and challenges, and kind of work backwards.
Okay. Another question that one of our participants has was, what is the best way to show senior leadership ROI on learning and development?
Okay, I have so many opinions on this. I'll try to keep it short. Showing ROI, so return on investment, like the ROI should be established in the language of the business, It should never be L&D saying, here's our ROI. We're trying to justify why we did this thing. Like, the ROI should be established when you initiate it. The business should be saying, we need better leaders, better managers. We need data scientists, or we need, people who need this technology. You say, great, that's what we're trying to solve. Let's talk about, to what extent we need to solve those problems, how we'll know that we've solved those problems. And then the ROI is not something that L&D is trying to generate. It's something that we can say, did we have the impact? Did we have, the impact that we were going for when we started this whole thing? And I really think it can be, there's all sorts of reasons why you might initiate a learning program or a training program. I don't think everything has to translate into hard dollar values. As long as you're solving the problem that, the business was looking to solve, I think that's great ROI. So your ability to demonstrate that, when you get into trouble when you've built and developed a program without that step, then it's hard. Then you're looking for the reasons to justify why you've, done this big investment in this learning program. What would you add, Bethany?
Yeah, I hear this theme that you're talking about between even your last answer and this answer, that we need to start to come in and become less of those order takers, right? And instead, we're having a seat at the table to have these strategy conversations, and it's being consultative in how we approach it. And so sometimes we need to upskill ourselves on business principles. so that we can communicate in that business sense. So oftentimes training and development and HR, we're translators, right? We're translators between the different pieces of the business. And it's really exciting that we're getting more and more opportunities to do that now that we're recognizing that upskilling is not an option anymore. It's crucial to have.
Perfect. Well, I think we're at time. Taylor, Bethany, any final words that you would like to share?
I'll just say I'm so glad, everyone's here and listening to this presentation. This is such a key critical topic for our organizations. We really, really want you to be successful. We need you all to be successful. So any ways that we can help each other navigate, be successful through this, we are willing to help. So please reach out if you have other questions or, think there might be ways for us to work together.
Excellent. Bethany?
Yeah, absolutely. Just an honor to be able to have a conversation with you. I've been reading some of the comments. So great to have a conversation with you today.
Excellent. Well, we hope you come back, and we appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with us. On behalf of all the participants, we want you to continue pouring into the profession, and we appreciate your time. We do have other HRCI insights coming up. The next one will be April 27th. And so make sure to mark your calendars for that. And then we do have some other webinars for the Alchemizing HR series. So mark your calendars for the 21st and the 28th. We'll be discussing COVID's impact on the workplace, and on the 28th, building inclusive workplaces. We definitely want to continue the conversation. So please make sure to go on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn group called HRCI Voices. It's really easy to find. And also, so you can stay in the loop with HRCI, we do have a newsletter. So just go to hrci.org, and on the bottom of the homepage, you can put in your email, and we will keep you up to date with our newsletter. And then as far as the recertification code, the ID number is 590682. Again, that's 590682. And we will leave this up for you for a couple of minutes. So thank you to everyone that attended today. We appreciate your time, and we hope that you walked away with some useful HR insights. Until next time, have a great day.